Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Fire is older than story itself. From the very moment humans learned to control flame, we've also had to learn how to keep it in check. First with desperate hands, then with buckets and crude pumps, and eventually with science, structure, and service. Today's firefighters, we stand inside that entire arc of history. We inherit not just the gear and the tactics, but traditions and lessons, some born in tragedy, some born in ingenuity, all of them shaping who we are. This is an episode I've wanted to put together and put out for probably the best part of 5 years. But every time I come across it and come back to it, we have working files for lots of debriefs and foundation episodes. I'm always adding more information to it and thinking it's not ready yet and you don't want to miss something out. But I also say, don't make good the enemy perfect. Don't make progress the enemy perfect. We can always revisit things. So I wanted to get this out. It's going to be a long one, but together in this episode, we're going to travel from ancient Alexandria to Imperial Rome, from Paris and Lisbon to London and Philadelphia, and right up into the modern age of drones, gas cooling, and thermal imaging. Along the way, we'll meet inventors, emperors, volunteers, professionals, and we'll pause on some of the myths and legends. That's one of the reasons I've been reluctant to put it out, because I'm not claiming any of this to be able to, stand on the test of time. We're all learning new things, but we've done so much research for this. And some of those myths and legends have crept into the fire service story. Because in this craft, honest history isn't trivia. It's a real safety tool. So I want us to know where we've come from, where we're going, and try and piece together some of this. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and I'll see you on the other side. Let's start with sparks in the ancient world. So our journey begins in Alexandria in the 3rd century BC, a city buzzing with invention, a Greek engineer named Ctesibius. I'm probably going to pronounce a lot of this stuff wrong as we go along. He devised one of the first recognized fire pumps. It was essentially a piston-powered machine that could push water under pressure onto flames. A century later, another Alexandrian inventor, Hero, redefined that design. These were primitive devices, but they were carried as the seed of an idea that survives to this day. Use pressure, add water, and you stand a chance of beating a fire. Some sources place the very first firefighting attempts even earlier in ancient Egypt, where records suggest that the use of simple hand pumps. The details blur a little bit across time though, but one thing is clear. By the time the Roman Empire rose to prominence, the idea of purpose-built firefighting tools was already in circulation. So let's talk about Rome, because it was Rome that organized firefighting, took its first major leap. In the year AD 6, Emperor Augustus created the Vigilus. It was a corps of thousands tasked with patrolling the city at night. They found fire and fought it with bucket chains, hand pumps, long poles, and heavy hooks. If the flames were too advanced, they would even use siege engines. They refer to them as ballistia or ballistae, to tear down buildings ahead of the fire's advance, creating crude fire breaks as they were then. But Rome's firefighting story has another less heroic strand. A wealthy power broker named Marcus Licinius Crassus ran his own private brigade of about 500 men. When a building caught fire, his men would rush to the scene, but instead of acting, they waited while Crassus bargained with the desperate property owner. If they could buy the building cheaply enough, the pumps went into action. If not, they just let it burn. This episode is brought to you in partnership with Godiva Limited. Godiva is one of the world's leading providers of specialist equipment for emergency services market. Godiva produces a comprehensive range of fire pumps, including vehicle-mounted, portable, and their cutting-edge integrated total water flow control system, SAMFlows. I've been using Godiva my entire career as a reliable pump on the fire ground. It is such a crucial element of a successful firefighting team that you want to empower your crews with the very best, reliable, quality product. Reach out to our partners by checking the notes in the podcast. Now back to the show. So even in Rome, fire protection was a tale of two traditions, one framed as civic duty under Augustus, and the other was raw profiteering under Crassus. Both existed side by side, literally in the same city. And then came the disaster that scarred Roman memory, the Great Fire of AD 64, which tore through 2/3 of the capital. The legends say that Emperor Nero fiddled while Rome burned. There were no fiddles, as we know them today, of course. It's part myth, part propaganda, but the truth is simpler. A densely packed wooden city basically ignited, and the state learned that once again that firefighting has to be organised before disaster strikes, not improvised during it. Let's switch to early Europe. So as the centuries rolled on, different nations tried their hand at organisation. In 1254, King Louis IX of France authorised the Guet Bourgeois, probably said that wrong as well, citizens who would patrol Paris at night to prevent crime and fire. And for a time, ordinary residents carried the duty, but the reign of Charles IX, the system had shifted back to royal control. In Britain, the Romans had introduced the idea of firefighting during their invasion of AD 43. But once they left, the practice kind of collapsed. Through the Middle Ages, towns were largely defenseless, built from wood and thatch, and often just burned to the ground. Some parishes eventually tried their own basic arrangements, but there was no standards or regulation, just buckets and desperation, really. London and its long relationship with fire. Now, London itself burned many times. Major fires struck in 798, 982, 989, and 1212, but it was actually the Inferno of 1666, which you should know, the Great Fire of London, that truly changed the course of firefighting history. That began in the bakery of Thomas Fariner on Pudding Lane, just after midnight on September 2nd. 4 days later, 2 square miles of the city lay in ash. The official death toll was listed as 6, but few believe that figure. Archaeologists later found melted pottery at the site, evidence that temperatures had soared to around 1700 degrees Celsius. Many poorer victims likely just left no trace. In the fire's aftermath, Londoners began to rethink fire protection. Nicholas Barden set up the Fire Office of 1667. It was the first fire insurance company, and they hired Thames watermen to fight the fire and porters to salvage goods. Policyholders nailed fire marks to their buildings, metal badges showing which company insured them. There's a legend that these private brigades would ignore the fire unless the building bore their company's badge. Modern historians, however, say that it's not strictly true. If one house went, the whole street was in risk, so brigades often acted regardless. But there were delays, rivalries and disputes, and in some cases, a blaze was indeed left to burn until the right company arrived. What these insurance badges did leave us is the idea of firefighters with uniforms and badges of identity. In fact, one of London's earliest brigades, the Hand in Hand Company, dressed its men in flamboyant outfits and issued large metal arm badges bearing the company's emblem. It is beyond a privilege to be able to bring the Firefighters podcast to you, and we are so grateful for every single person that supports, listens, shares, and follows our journey. But here's the honest truth. It takes a colossal amount of time and work to keep the podcast going. And to help us keep doing it, create more, reach more guests internationally, and make the podcast sustainable, we're asking for you to help. And to do this, we've set up a Patreon page. Now, by joining this, you'll not only support the future of the podcast, but also gain access to exclusive benefits. Now, if you've ever wanted to meet a member of the podcast, buy us a beer, buy us a coffee, and you think anything you've ever listened to on the podcast has been worth £3, that's basically what we're asking you for. By joining our Patreon community, you will get access to every single full episode archive we have ever made. Now, hundreds and hundreds of key documents that we've got in there on fire behavior, firefighter health, cancer risks, instant debriefs, and so much more. So if you feel like you want to join the Patreon crew and help us make this possible, head to patreon.com/TFFPC or check the link in any episode podcast notes. Then we had the invention boom. So the late 1600s and 1700s were the golden age of invention in terms of firefighting equipment. Manual pumps had already been rediscovered in places like Augsburg and Nuremberg. The German engineer Hans Hausch, probably got that wrong as well, improved them with suction and force capability. In the Netherlands, Jan van der Heyden created the first flexible leather fire hose in 1672, with brass couplings at 50-foot intervals. That length, in various form, still remains a standard today. Soon after, John Lofting moved to London and patented his sucking worm engine, 1690, one of the first suction-capable hand engines. Prints of the time show his machines in action, men heaving on handles while insurance plaques gleam on the walls behind them. A few decades later, Richard Newsham perfected a design that became the backbone of firefighting across all of England. His engines, patented in 1720s, could throw a solid stream over 100 feet. Manned by teams of a dozen firefighters on the pump handles, Newsham's company dominated the market well into the 1770s. And by the end of the century, firms like Hadley, Simpkin and Lott were scaling up even further, with horse-drawn hand engines ready to roll across London's cobblestones. Let's flip back to the international, so France, Portugal, and Napoleon's firefighters. So while London was busy insuring itself, other European capitals made their own moves. Lisbon established a fire corps as early as 1395, a service that still exists today under the name Segimento de Sapadores Bomberos de Lisboa. Thank you. In Paris, François de Maurice de Perrier introduced a dozen new pumps in 1716 and formed the Compagnie de Gardes Pompes, i.e. the Pump Guards. These men wore uniforms, trained for fires, and by 1733 their services were made free to the public, so people would call them sooner. And by the mid-1700s, they were becoming a paramilitary unit. And in 1756, King Louis XV, I think it was, even recommended helmets for their protection. Later, in 1810, Napoleon Bonaparte reorganized firefighting after a deadly blaze in the Austrian embassy. He created the sapeurs-pompiers, military engines who doubled as firefighters. Under his system, firefighting became a professional, disciplined, and almost martial service. Next, we move to Britain's municipal turn and Braidwood. So in Britain, a major shift came with the establishment of the Edinburgh Fire Engine Establishment in 1824 under James Braidwood. This was one of the first true municipal brigades, and Braidwood became known for insisting on discipline, training, and an interior approach. Crews crawling low under smoke to attack the fire directly became more of a common practice. When London's insurance companies combined to form the London Fire Engine Establishment in 1833, they actually hired Braidwood to lead it. He commanded 17 stations and around 80 men. However, as you'll know, in a previous debrief on the podcast, tragedy struck in 1861 at the Great Tooley Street warehouse fire, where Braidwood was killed by a collapsing wall. Crews at the time were even issued small measures of rum to keep spirits up, a tradition borrowed actually from the Navy, where many early firefighters had trained as sailors. By 1866, the private insurance model had been abandoned, and the Metropolitan Fire Brigade was born, funded by the city. Under the leadership of Captain Massey Shaw, the brigade modernised with steam engines, telegraph lines, and new stations. Shaw even recruited sailors directly, citing their fitness, their agility at heights, and their familiarity with round-the-clock watches. London's fire shift still called watches to this day. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together. Across the Atlantic, in America, fire protection followed its own rhythm. Boston banned wooden chimneys and thatched roofs as early as 1631. New Amsterdam's governor appointed chimney wardens in 1648 and set up the Rattle Watch, volunteers patrolling the streets at night with large wooden rattles to sound the alarm. The first fire engine company was formed over there in 1678, and in 1736 Benjamin Franklin created the Union Fire Company in Philadelphia, often cited as the first organized volunteer fire brigade in the colonies. Franklin's model was one of mutual aid and discipline. Firefighters protected one another's homes, working kind of as a club. Another founding father joined the ranks later in 1774, George Washington. who bought Alexandria's very first fire engine and volunteered as a firefighter in the Friendship Veterans Fire Engine Company. And in New York, in 1818, Molly Williams became the first recorded female firefighter in America, hauling a pumper through the deep snow during a blizzard to join the men at the fire line. But for all those noble stories, the reality was messy. Many American fire companies were private, funded by insurers, and they competed, sometimes violently, for the right to put out a blaze. Crews fought over hydrants, some even set runners to cover hydrants with barrels, reserving the water for their own company. Volunteer companies became political machines, none more famous than the Boss Tweed's Americas Engine Company No. 6, the so-called Big Six, which became a power base for Tammany Hall. It wasn't until 1853 that Cincinnati formed the first all-career full-time department in the United States. Let's talk about the equipment: engines, horses, and steam. Now, through the 1800s, firefighting equipment raced to catch up with the demands of swelling cities. In 1829, England saw the first horse-drawn steam fire engine. At first, crews distrusted it. They relied for centuries on hand-pump machines, and the idea of trusting a boiler under pressure just felt dangerous. By 1860, though, the advantages were impossible to ignore, and slowly, steam became the norm. By 1903, self-propelled steam fire engines were on the streets, and just 2 years later, in 1905, internal combustion engines were arriving. These machines could carry water, ladders, and men faster and farther than any horse team could. By the 1920s, the fire horse, a powerful, loyal animal that had pulled fire engines through countless alarms, was largely retired. Their departure was mourned, but the future was machine-driven. And in this shift, you can hear a cultural change. Firefighting was no longer powered by the backs of a dozen men on pump handles or the muscles of a horse team. It was powered by engineering, by steel and pistons. Communities were given way to municipalities, and the fire service was moving towards the age of professional machine. Let's touch on the wartime, especially the Blitz. If you ask many Londoners what the most desperate days of firefighting look like, they'll say one word: the Blitz. In 1938, with war looming, Britain formed the Auxiliary Fire Service, a part-time force to support the London Fire Brigade. They were given little training and minimal equipment, but when the bombs started falling in 1940, they stood side by side with the professionals. Through 1940 and 41, London was pounded nightly by high explosive and incendiary bombs. Entire streets would light up like kindling. Firefighters hauled hoses through the rubble, dodged falling masonry, and worked until they dropped. In 1941, the fire brigades across the country were unified into a single national fire service. It was the busiest period in British firefighting history. Crews didn't just work in London, they deployed across the country, and some even went overseas. On D-Day, a unit known as Fire Force 14 landed with the troops in Normandy. A lot of people didn't know that. They were tasked with extinguishing fires under enemy fire to protect villages and supply lines. The National Fire Service lost hundreds of men and women during the war. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who once personally joined the fire crew to put out a blaze on the roof of Blenheim's palace, nicknamed them angels with grimy faces. It was an acknowledgement that the fight they waged in the cities was every bit as vital as the fight on the front.
MSA are supporting us on today's podcast, and I chose to partner with them because I've been wearing this stuff for nearly 20 years, and they are the global leader in development, manufacture, and supply of incredible, safe products that really protect people, not just our communities out there, but also first responders, most importantly, all over the world. Get yourself over to MSA and have a look at it. The high-performance protective clothing for emergency services responders. They also partner with us on the UK Pink Firefighters. That's because we love them. The helmets with the reflective visor, the F1XF, absolutely epic helmet. And not forgetting how they improve firefighter safety through their connectivity in the connected firefighter platform. MSA are always pushing the envelope, and it's a real privilege to be able to continue to grow our partnership together. So whether it's your PPE, your bunker gear, your helmets, your SCBA, your thermal imaging, your Luna, or your portable gas detection, both of us know that this equipment needs to work. It needs to be high quality, reliable, and dependable in the moment. And that's why I use MSA, because they know what's at stake.
Then we move after the war, the rebuilding, the reform. So when the war ended, Britain reorganised its fire services. In 1948, the Fire Services Act came into effect, returning responsibility to local county councils and boroughs. For a time, there were nearly 150 separate brigades across the country, each with its own stations, uniforms, and culture. Later, reorganizations in 1974 and again in 86 saw many of these brigades amalgamated, renamed, or shifted under new authorities. London's own story reflected the larger national trend. After the war, the London Fire Brigade was rebuilt under Chief Officer Frederick Delve. New appliances rolled out, new breathing apparatus was issued, and new stations rose from the rubble. The proto breathing set, wonder if any of the listeners can remember that, an early self-contained apparatus became a symbol of modern post-war firefighting. In 1965, the Greater London Council took over responsibility and absorbed surrounding brigades. When the GLC was dissolved in the 1980s, the London Fire and Civil Defence Authority took control, and later the London Fire and Emergency Planning Authority. But by the 1990s, the London Fire Brigade was covering over 600 square miles and serving more than 7 million people. Firefighters there dealt with over 1 million incidents, not just fires, but we started doing train crashes, motorway pileups, floods, terrorist attacks. Firefighting had become all hazards work, rescue response, and resilience, all in one uniform. It's easy to think of firefighters only as hose teams and ladders. Maybe many members of the public might think that. But throughout history, they've also been neighbours and community leaders. In Tunbridge Wells, for example, a firefighter raised money for widows and orphans by standing in public with his dog, Jack, and his cat, Arthur. People came to pat the animals, stayed to listen, and donated coins. It's a small story, but it carries a truth. Firefighters have always been more than just emergency responders. They're part of like a social fabric, a moral compass. Trusted phrases in times of both crisis and calm. Through all of this time, the fuels changed as well, from wool to plastics, if you remember, and many others. So by the mid-20th century, another great challenge had emerged. It wasn't bombs or collapsing buildings, but the fuel itself. Older fires involved wood, cotton and wool. A room might take 20 minutes or more to reach flashover. Crews had time, and by the 1960s and 70s, modern homes were filling with synthetic materials, polyurethane foams, plastics, and polymers. These were cheaper and often treated to resist ignition. But when they did burn, they released ferocious heat and highly toxic smoke. Today, many rooms can reach flashover in as little as 4 minutes. The smoke itself is a lethal cocktail. Carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide, benzene, formaldehyde. These gases can and do poison by inhalation and even by seeping through the skin. Firefighters had to adapt. Better protective clothing and breathing apparatus helped, but the real leap came when science joined the tradition. Countries like Sweden pioneered compartment fire behavior training, teaching firefighters to read smoke, to control the flow of air and to cool the gases, not just the seat of the fire. Out of this came the modern non-negotiables of firefighting. Spoken about them before on the podcast. Stay low where the air's clearest, control the flow path before you create it, cool the gases above, get water on the fire as quickly as possible. And obviously, use thermal imaging to see what your eyes cannot. This wasn't just a change in tactics, it was a whole change in mindset. Fire was no longer seen as unpredictable chaos. It was chemistry and physics. It was understandable. And if it was understandable, for the firefighters at least, it should be survivable. I want to take a minute to just tell you about something that I think you're going to be really interested in. Next September, firefighters from across the UK and Ireland will be travelling to Atlanta, Georgia for something truly special. It's the United for 9/11. It's the Memorial Stair Climb. Now, this isn't just any event. It's a once-in-a-generation tribute where 343 firefighters, one for every FDNY firefighter who gave their life on September 11th, will climb 110 floors in their honour. It's about more than just a physical challenge. It's about remembering sacrifice, pushing ourselves, and standing shoulder to shoulder across services and across nations. It's a chance to honour the legacy of 9/11, to pay tribute to our fallen firefighters, and to test your mental and physical strength, and to raise an awareness around mental health and resilience in the fire service. Whether you take part in this climb or not, support from home, or simply help spread the word, you can be part of it. This is about unity, remembrance, and respect. So if you want to learn more, head over to www.memorialstairclimb.co.uk or on Instagram, check out United_911 climb. This is going to be something powerful. I hope you can make it. I hope you can support it. Now back to the show. Now we walk to the modern firefighter. You walk into station today and you'll just see how far we've come if you've listened to this. Engines powered by diesel and pumps that can deliver 1,500 gallons per minute. Firefighters dressed in multi-layered PPE turnout gear with vapor barriers and particulate filters and helmets made of composites and self-contained breathing apparatus that let us go where no human could safely breathe. Size up should be done. Thermal imaging cameras and even drones are all over the place. Incident commanders use real-time data, and somewhere in the research lab, scientists are experimenting with fire suppression using sound waves or even directed light particles. But despite the technology, the mission hasn't changed. Firefighters are still accountable to protect life, property, and the environment. We still crawl low into black smoke, still put ourselves between flame and victim. We still stand ready when the alarm bell rings. And I wanted to add in something around our badge, because it's very symbolic, isn't it? Every fire and rescue service in the UK has its own badge, but they all share the same foundation if you look. An 8-pointed star, the cross of St. John, if you didn't know. The 8 points are said to represent knightly virtues: tact, gallantry, dexterity, observation, perseverance, loyalty, explicitness, and sympathy. It's easy to dismiss that as just like old thoughts, old tradition. But if you look closely, those virtues should still guide us, really. Tact in dealing with frightened families, gallantry when the risk is justified, dexterity when doing all of the multifaceted parts of our roles, climbing ladders, forcing entry, rope rescue, whatever it might be. Observation during size up, signs and symptoms. How is the environment acting? What's the lay of the road? Getting that wider situational awareness. Perseverance. Perseverance is something I'm sure we can all relate to in different ways. Under the heat, under the exhaustion, under the long shift. Loyalty to your crew, to your watch, to your service, to your family, to the community. Explicitness in orders and communications. Some people struggle with that these days. And then we have sympathy. Sympathy for victims. Sympathy for each other. Sympathy for people whose lives we step into on a day-to-day basis. The badge on the chest or on the sleeve or on the helmet isn't just a patch of cloth. It really is centuries of tradition stitched into the modern fire service. So where does all this history leave us? Well, hopefully you found it interesting. And hopefully it leaves us with the recognition that today's firefighter doesn't stand alone. Every time we get a hose off, every time we stretch a line, every time we crawl down a hallway, open a branch or a nozzle, we're joined by the shadows of those who have come before us. We are walking with Ctesibius and Hero and Augustus. We're walking with Napoleon's Pompier, with Braidwood, with Franklin and Washington and Molly Williams. We're walking with the Blitzkrieg, the Fire Force 14 on D-Day, with sailors turned firefighters and volunteers turned professionals. And in walking with them, we inherit not just their skills, but their mistakes, their myths, their victories, their lessons, their debriefs, and their sacrifices. History is interesting, but it isn't a comfort blanket we pull over ourselves when tragedy strikes. It should be a tool. It shows us what works, where it came from, and also what doesn't and why. It reminds us that fire shouldn't be unpredictable. It should be understandable. And if we understand it, we hopefully stand a better chance of surviving it. Courage, compassion, community. Those three things have outlasted every invention. Every piece of kit, every new policy, every new procedure, every reorganization and political argument of the fire service. And they'll outlast us too. And that, in the end, is an insight into the true history of firefighting and the profession you have committed yourself to. I'll see you on the next one.
Well, that's it for today, folks. Hope you took a lot away from that episode. We started the Firefighters podcast to develop, inspire, connect, motivate, represent, and most importantly, celebrate the world of incredible emergency services operators and the wider sector through this series of wide-ranging conversations. We really love creating this podcast and bringing it to so many people. Did you know you can also find these on YouTube? We do a lot of video podcasts now. You can head over to our YouTube page and follow, subscribe there. And as a final ask from us, whatever platform you're on, please rate the podcast. It really helps us as a key performance indicator to reach more and more people. I've been your host, Pete Wakefield. This has been the Firefighters Podcast. And wherever you are in the world, please stay safe, be happy, live with intention, and where possible, please remember and support your firefighters and first responders. I'll see you next time.